On November 10, 2019, Evo Morales resigned as president of Bolivia. He says he was forced to resign to stop the violence towards supporters of his party, the movement towards socialism, as well as threats to himself and those close to him. The fact that the Bolivian military asked him to resign seems to support his claim that he did not resign of his own free will. His opposition, including many from the US and Canada, seemed to think that this was a major win for democracy. In October 2019, Bolivian election authorities reported Morales had a 7.9% lead over the second-place candidate, with 84% of the votes counted. This non-binding tally was then interrupted for 23 hours, and when it came back online, Morales had a lead of over 10%, thereby avoiding a runoff. This 10% lead was in line with the polls. Allegations of fraud made by the Organization for American States, who have a history of negating the results of democratic elections, served to set the coup in motion. The coup leaders had help from the West. Many of the leaders had been trained at the School of the Americas. The National Endowment for Democracy and USAID funneled millions of dollars to opposition and democracy promotion groups. WikiLeaks revealed that Carlos Mesa, the second-place candidate, had regular contact with U.S. officials who were trying to destabilize the government. Coup leader Luis Fernando Camacho spent years leading an overtly fascist separatist organization, and General William Calaman, who suggested that Morales resign, received a $1 million payment from the U.S. after the coup. Trump welcomed the news of the coup and used it to threaten other illegitimate regimes like Nicaragua and Venezuela. Chrystia Freeland, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, released a statement noting, "Canada stands with Bolivia and the democratic will of its people. We note the resignation of President Morales and will continue to support Bolivia during this transition and the new elections." The corporate media was quick to fall in line and throw their support behind the coup while being very careful to avoid the word coup and discredit anyone who did. But by the time corporate media finally admitted that there was no evidence of election fraud, it was too late. Janine Áñez became interim president, and she quickly issued a decree to protect the military and the police against legal consequences for excessive violence. A few days later, the military opened fire on protesters near Cochabamba and later killed more unarmed protesters near El Alto. Dissident journalists and Morales supporters were killed, tortured, and driven underground. Western media powers that were very concerned about supporting democracy during the Morales presidency were largely silent in the face of this violent crackdown. On January 22, 2006, Morales became the first Bolivian president to be elected from its indigenous population. He moved Bolivia towards a mixed economy and reduced its dependence on the World Bank and the IMF. He increased taxation on the foreign-owned industry to bolster social spending and emphasized projects to combat illiteracy, poverty, racism, and sexism. And he was also a very vocal critic of neoliberalism. Bolivia nationalized hydrocarbons and forced oil companies to hand over 82% of their product to the state. Morales went on to nationalize mineral resources, electricity, telecommunications, and other production sectors. He redistributed 134 million acres of land from state or private ownership to indigenous families, some of whose relatives had been forced to work as sharecroppers or slaves. Putting the people of Bolivia ahead of international corporations paid big dividends. Bolivia had the fastest growing economy in Latin America, with an economic growth averaging 5% under Morales. GDP grew from $9 billion in 2005 to over $42 billion before he was ousted. Strong economic growth allowed Bolivia to reduce poverty by 42% and extreme poverty by 60% since President Evo Morales took office in 2006. Under Morales, unemployment was nearly halved, 4,500 educational facilities were built, minimum wage increased several times, 900,000 impoverished Bolivians received access to price-controlled electricity, a free lunch program was launched for school children, and illiteracy in the country was effectively ended. Before Morales, Bolivia was heavily reliant on predatory loans from the World Bank and the IMF. The conditions and austerity measures imposed by these institutions, such as cuts to public services, privatization decrees, and wage reductions, greatly affected the Bolivian economy. IMF-driven reforms generally benefited the elite and hurt the poor. Morales ended Bolivia's dependence on the World Bank and the IMF and reversed years of neoliberal policies that they had imposed on the country, allowing him to pursue economic and social policies without the influence of the United States, which wields considerable power within these international financial institutions. Before the coup, China was prepared to invest $2.3 billion in Bolivia's lithium. China would own 49% of the venture, and Bolivia would own a controlling 51%. Instead of simply using Bolivian miners as low-wage labor, only to export the lithium for production elsewhere, China was prepared to allow Bolivia to produce the batteries which would add value and jobs. Could this be why the West wanted Morales out of power? On October 18, 2020, Luis Arce of the Movement for Socialism Party was elected president of Bolivia in a landslide, winning 55% of the vote. Hopefully, he completes his term without the military asking him to resign.